Come for me, and I'll send Jesus after you, y'all. We got to talk about it. We got to talk about all of this.
Only apply that. Get it, don't be timid when you ain't apply that. Love a bone, give along, leave it. I don't want no trip, baby, spend like
My name is Ashley, and this is My Sweet Perspective, where I give my take on all things TV and movie related, and I am here to put you on, okay? You guys, welcome back to the channel. Ciao, we have a lot to talk about. Happy New Year! We are back to talk the cult of the Real Housewife. Okay, we're getting all into married business, and it's a lot to talk about here, y'all. It's a lot. I was questioning, do I want to do a full video? I've done my little shorts, for TikTok and for Instagram, but I was like, do I want to come and do a full length review on this documentary? And sweet peas, this needs to be talked about. We need to discuss it ad nauseum, from the history to the vendettas to the lies, to the schemes that Todd set up, to the white slavery of it all, to the motivation behind it, right? Like, why marry? Why now? Why this? And then, of course, we'll end it with my overall thoughts of this. But yes, this was a three-part docu-series that premiered on TLC. It is on HBO Max today, Friday, January 2nd. And it was a lot to dive into. I am not going episode by episode. I'm going to cover this based on the things that stood out to me in the docu-series, and we're going to chop it up. Now, I am a casual viewer of the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. I definitely was one of those people who was like, Mary, yes, get over here, Mary, because she was going to talk crazy. She was going to tell it like it was. She was slightly offbeat and quirky. And honestly, these are all things, in my opinion, that go into a potential cult leader. But what this documentary does, and I think what shining light on this situation does, is it makes you open your eyes to the fact of what a cult actually is, right? Because you can kind of have this preconceived idea that cults are really just places where people wear funny outfits. They live on communes. They're naked. There's all manner of stuff going on in this secluded place. But we very seldom think about cults being places that people go to weekly, right? And we don't tend to believe that cults are church family has been going to for their entire lives. We tend to kind of dissociate that. And I think that this docu-series did do a good job of making you really look at the things that make up a cult. They actually even have an expert that's kind of breaking down each aspect of it. But of course, we're going to get into it. But let's start just with Mary in general and how we initially meet her on the Real Housewives of Salt Lake. And like I said, she was like the splash of diversity over there. We had Jen Shaw, but we didn't have another Black woman, as we don't in a lot of the Housewives franchises, who was here and who had her own personality and who married her grandfather. Step, albeit it's very odd because that man has been a part of her life since she was 3 years old, right? And so we get this yarn that's knit, like, yeah, like my grandmother, you know, had the church faith temple, and she was so huge in the community, and when she passed, she left everything to me, but she also left her husband to me, and she wanted me to marry him, and she wanted all of these things, which later in the docu-series we'll get into the truth of all of that. But yeah, it's a lot to unpack, and I think the biggest question that a lot of people had, a lot of people of color had, is why marry? Why now? Why was she chosen of all of the people in all of the franchises in all of history? Why is this being a concerted, very targeted effort against a housewife specifically? We've had housewives that have gone to prison and gotten little docs, right, about that. But this was really a very targeted, very pointed piece against Mary Cosby completely. Like, you hands down, there's not really any other way to look at it. This isn't an objective docu-series where we're going to get both sides of the story. Mary and her husband Robert declined to participate or comment on the docu-series itself, and so we just kind of have what we have. But let's get into it. So of course, it's the history of it all, fact versus fiction. What really happened down here, Mary? Because it's not the story that you told. It's not the story that you told. It's not the story that you told at all, my good sis. All right. And so of course there were hummings, there were murmurings. I never dug beneath the surface while the show was on, but there was definitely talk around, the people in the congregation. Is she using them? They're on food stamps. She's taking all of their money. And of course, the only rebuttal that we got from that is, why would I be on a housewife show if I was abusing my parishioners, if I was taking all their money? And the allegations, were made kind of light work, at least by Mary. Like, no, that's not the case. That's lies. When she called all them people broke, and that she only got 14 cards for her birthday, and that there were poor people and she don't associate with poor people, and that God don't like poor people either. All right. So you can't even be in her circle. And so we're kind of getting that initially. And it's like, all right. Okay, so now as the documentary sets in, we're going to be talking to the Enochs. That's Ernest, Rosalind, and Mike, three of which grew up in the church with their father leading the choir, and now are adults. But two that stayed there, even under Mary's reign, at the church, and they're kind of now giving their story about what really happened there, the abuse of power, the way that they were treated, the way that they were made to feel small and minimal, and Mary's role in the church, right? So Mama was from Indianapolis, Indiana, and she literally packed up her children at a very young age and started walking to Salt Lake City. Said they took bus, train, walking, whatever, because she felt like the Lord was calling her there. She'd done a ton of camp meetings back in Indianapolis and kind of had made not just a name for herself, but I think for her family and the ministry. And she really felt called to the people of Salt Lake City. She felt called to them, and that this would be a church that anyone of any color, of any creed, could go to and find sanctuary, could find hope, could find love. And honestly, that's I think the most heartbreaking thing about this entire docuseries is the fact that it seems as though this church and this ministry was based on a foundation of truth and of love and of hope. And the way that it's been so distorted is terrible. Okay. And so we get that. And so you kind of get the picture of who Mama was, the fierceness, the determination. She gets to Salt Lake, she gets a home, and she starts having services there where anybody can come. And so she's got this beautiful, diverse mix of people where she's teaching the people, and they love her. They love Mama because Mama was going to welcome you in, even though she was the overseer, the pastor of the church. She said she felt more like a mother to these people. They loved on her and she loved them back. And a lot of people had never felt the type of love that she gave. And so while she's there ministering, they go back to a tent revival or another camp meeting in Indy, and they bring back 40 people. Well, one of those 40 people was Robert. Okay. Now, mind you, by this age, Mama's already, I think, in her late 40s, early 50s. She's got her own children. And Robert is after her. He's 27 years old and he wants what he wants. Okay. We even have an elder mother who went to the church many years ago who says, baby, if it wasn't love, they couldn't tell. Everyone tells the story that Robert was someone completely different in the beginning than the person that he came out to be later on in life. But they're married. Mama didn't want to. She was hesitant. Like, I don't like this age thing. I don't like how it looks. They brought it before the church and the people were here for it. They loved it. They wanted to see Mama happy and all of that. Now, Mama not only was a mother in the spiritual, she was also a mother in the natural and had adopted two babies, two sons, right? And as they're there and Robert is making his way, not only is that, but also the bishop of the church, we start to kind of see some stuff come out. We have one of her sons comes out and talks about really the abuses vaguely that they encountered at the hand of Robert. He was a military man, and he and the other elders of the church would take the boys out and would, for all intents and purposes, abuse them. Corporal punishment, really for no reason. This was just to toughen them up, to make them strong. And of course, when one of the brothers finally tells Mama, she says they put an end to that. She put an end to that immediately, yet she stayed with this man. Okay. All that's going on. And it's like, okay, well, this seemingly is going good. The church is flourishing. She's very well respected. The people love her. But then we have Mary's history come up. And according to the people in the streets, allegedly, in my opinion, they said that Mary was a city girl. Mary was a city girl. She was ripping and running them streets. She was doing the absolute most. The sister said she came to live with me, took my car. I had to go to work. She took my car for 2 weeks. I had to go looking for Mary because Mary was about that bread, that bread, that head. Okay. She wanted a man who was going to be able to offer something to her and provide for her. She liked men with money even back then. And she was living her best life out in these streets. Okay. At some point, she eventually gets married to a man named Dana. And while she's doing that and doing all of her stuff, she ends up getting disfellowshipped from the church at the behest of Mama. Mama says, "You're doing too much." And disfellowship is not quite excommunication because you can still attend the church. It's if you grew up in the ministry in the church, you would say she was basically sat down because she couldn't speak, she couldn't participate in the services, she couldn't be in the choir, she couldn't do any of those things, right? And so we're going through all of those things. She's disfellowshipped. Now, while she's disfellowshipped, Mama unexpectedly passes away. Okay. So mama's gone. Now there's a question of succession. And this is when her mama comes in, Rozzy, and is like, okay, this kind of should be my church. Now, if you watch Real Housewives of Salt Lake, you've heard Mary kind of go into this. Like she's estranged from her mother. Her mother didn't like the fact that grandma had left everything to Mary. And in this docuseries, we get to the kind of the truth of the matter, and that wasn't anything of the sort. Nothing of the sort, okay? Because Mary, like I said, was married to this man, Dana, and disfellowship from the church, meaning she was not in service to the church at that time when Mama passes away. Mama's husband is there, and everyone is like, okay, he's the bishop. He'll be running things, and that's fine. That we're good with that. We like this. This will be what it is, right? And so, very quickly, though, the tides turn and change, and there's this campaign that Mary and the bishop should be together. So much so, he's calling special meetings, asking the people, did the Lord tell you that Mary's supposed to be my wife? And people are looking like, what do you mean? She's married to someone else. So all of the conversation around this is what my grandmother wanted. She wanted me to have the churches, the businesses, all of that, and her husband called into question. Now, a YouTuber did an interview with Rozzy, which is Mary's mother, and Rozzy's husband, and they say this was all the work of Robert. That Robert always had his eye on her, that Mary was a young 20 something, beautiful. And basically, he convinced her that this is what the grandmother wanted, but this wasn't what the grandmother wanted. In my little research that I did, Rozzy was actually able to sue them not too many years ago and was awarded $1.5 million for some forgeries that took place. The lies of it all. So I think in some way, Mary is under a very strong delusion that this is what her grandmother wanted. But the fact that she was disfellowshipped at the time, the fact that she was married to a whole other man, and like I said, they brought that man in, berated him, made him tell Mary that he didn't love her anymore. And kind of caused this divorce just so that Robert could have her. I think that's the real documentary. Mary was hell, and I'm not going to take anything off of her from that because what we find out later in the docuseries really cements in my mind that there was definitely wrongdoing, that she caused harm to people. But the fact that he was very predatory, to think that you helped to raise this grandbaby from the age of 3 years old, and when she got 22, you married her. That needs to be investigated. Now, as far as what I understand now, as far as Faith Temple, they said online that the services opened back up in 2025, that there were renovations, but the word on the street is nobody's there anymore. Everybody, after all was said and done, has gone. And so now, Mary's in the ministry. She's married to this man. They're living their best life seemingly, and she's been elevated. She was gifted a brand new BMW when they got together. So she's living her life. And if you saw her on Real Housewives, you see what it is. You see the materials. You saw the closet. You saw the bedroom. You saw the fact that she said she was getting an apartment just for her clothes. And they say that she was the wealthiest woman in the Salt Lake franchise of Real Housewives. at $5 million, I believe was her estimated net worth. Now they talk about a lot of businesses that they have, but what's pointed in this doc is the fact that there was an abuse of funds, an abuse of power to obtain funds from the congregants. Now, and that's something that they're going to have to make more sense for me. I believe it fully, but also I think there has to be a money trail. I think when you're doing a docuseries or a documentary and highlighting corruption, we need to have like some cold hard facts about some things, and I would like to understand the businesses of it all. I would like to understand the finances of Faith Temple while it was going. Those are things I think that need to be addressed. It's very hard with churches because they are under a 501c3, and people willfully drew out of their 401ks. People willfully mortgaged their homes. People willfully got evicted because they said they needed these funds. And so as it's going on, and very early in the Real Housewives franchise, how even Mary got on the show was this man, Cameron. Now, Cameron was a very educated, well-off man who, doing the best that he can. Seemingly a really nice guy who was just looking for community and looking for spirituality, looking for a home. He finds Faith Temple, immediately falls in love with the church, but apparently he falls in love with something more. He falls in love with something more. And so he heard about the opportunity for the Real Housewives and he thought Mary would be a great fit. And so apparently he's the one who made the introductions so that she could be on the show, but also gives us some tea about some things that happen, stuff that he does feel comfortable going into on TV, but later we get the full for uno uno. Now, unfortunately, Cameron passes away. He had a brain tumor and he passed away from complications of surgery, is what they said in the docuseries. But apparently they had an illicit affair, allegedly. Screwing him on Saturday night, and he would be up in the pulpit on Sunday morning. That's word on the street. That's word on the street. And they carried this on in that he loved her so much, or thought he did. He felt like he was sleeping with God when he slept with Mary. At some point, I believe he gets a revelation of, how this was not the case, how Mary was not God. But a lot of people do that. We've seen that a lot of times, typically with male leadership, where they'll have a congregation of women that he's screwing, and they do it because they feel closer to God. It's like this thing, right? Like you are the closest thing to God. And a lot of people in my TikTok comments were like, they are supposed to think about pastors in that way, and they're not. That's not what this is. It wasn't like you're the closest thing to God. These people acted like Mary was God. That's a huge difference. When she says, there's only one mediator between God and man, and who you think that is, and they say, you Mary, and she comes back with it like, well, I didn't say it. You said it. That's crazy. That's crazy, but it happens a lot when people's egos become inflated and they are pedestalized and made to feel like they are greater than and bigger than the program. So Cameron's passed away, but he's told one of the Enoch brothers. He's also told Mary's cousin, listen, this is what it was. Yeah, I felt on her coot nanny. I did all of the things. And now I'm feeling a way about it. Okay, so that's that, and we get that, and it's like, okay, well, that's the sex part because most cults rely on money, sex, and power. Those are like the things: money, power, respect, what you need in life. Okay, and so now we're kind of digging into the other things that were happening. So not only were they doing these heave offerings where you had to come up with X amount of dollars by a date. I need 100,000 by Thursday. Unless you buying me land, like, listen, I need that. I gotta have that. And apparently, a lot of the people in the congregation didn't know how Mary and Robert were living, right? I don't know how they didn't know, but I guess they kept those things very secret. I don't think anyone really knew the fullest extent of what was happening. But we're going down there. There is also the Enoch. And like I said, it was very pointed. It was specifically I want to say two different families. We had Susie, who was the sister of Don and Miss Pat, who they're passed away now. But then we also had the Enoch family, and I think they were two families that were ingrained, that had been there at Faith Temple their whole life, to see the transition and also kind of suffer at the hands. We saw that Rosalind not only was, sang in the choir and did all those things, but she also worked for them when she was laid off. She worked for them for free. Okay. And then the brother was the organist, and the brother who had left the church early had a daughter. And unfortunately, this daughter passed away in a car accident. And on the show, Mary, wear your seatbelts. It was so sick and so crass and so sad. And the fact they said she didn't even inquire after the young lady, to send condolences or do any of those things. A young lady who had been a part of this church for her entire life. To me, that really spoke volumes, but also spoke to why the Enoch family feels the way that they feel about her now. Later on, we get into the white slavery of it all, where they have Miss Pat, an 80-year-old white woman, as their housekeeper, that they're not paying. All right. And they said she talked to that lady like a dog. The lady said she wakes up some mornings and didn't even want to. And Rosalind said one morning she just didn't. That was probably one of the saddest things, because, cults are going to take your money. That's what they're going to do. And people willfully make a choice to do that, whether it's mind control, brainwashing, right? People make that choice. Um, but it's so sad when people think that their salvation is contingent upon your approval. So much so that they're willing to do any and everything that you say, whether it's good or bad, because you're supposed to be the authority, and you take that and you abuse it for your own personal gain and don't give a single damn. It's so sad. And I think that's kind of the biggest message of it all, is that you have to have your bearings. And it's hard, I think, when you grow up in something, to deconstruct it, especially when it started out pure, seemingly pure, right? Because when we go back to Mama's church, it definitely seemed like there was a different spirit there than what we got later on. And so, the transition happens. Rozzy, Mary's mama, does a staged walkout, honey. It was the most dramatic thing I've seen in a very long time. I was kind of here for it. She called everybody out, because what are y'all doing? And so half the church, I guess, went with her, half them stayed, and we saw the outcome of it all these years later. Now, a lot of people since that time have left and have gone over to Soul Restoration Church, which houses, I guess, a lot of the members. And the pastor, they're looking for a church home now. So if you're in Salt Lake and you got a building, I don't know, talk to them. But basically, they've opened up their church as a refuge from the people from Faith Temple who have been done harm. Now, as far as, like I said, the present state of Faith Temple, child, I don't know. The building still looked like there were fences up around it. They looked like no renovations had been done. Um, but we'll see. Now, as far as the docuseries, like I said, I do think that it was done, okay? And a lot of information was there. They had YouTubers on there, people who had done an investigative journalist, they had a cult expert there, which is fine. But I do think, for a documentary's credibility, we do need to have that paper trail. The money trail got to make sense, because with all those businesses, who's to say some of that money's not coming from the businesses? Again, I fully believe harm was done. I think financial abuse was committed. I believe that fully, but also I think you have to back up your claims, right? Also, we didn't get another side, anybody's other side. Now, Mary, they wasn't gonna make a statement, and that's on them. But were there any other parishioners that you could talk to, that you could bring on to get another side of it? That's just that. Overall, it was interesting, especially for someone who didn't follow Mary and her story all these years. It was a doozy. I will say that when Rosalind at the end talks about, finally getting a revelation, right? And it was very interesting, because Mary's sister's there as well. And she's talking, and she's very much like, I believed my sister to be that connection to God for me. And she had to get a revelation one day. She was like, the enemy had her thinking that she needed to take herself out, all of these things. And she heard a voice say, "Look up, your redemption draweth nigh." That's a cult. And that was the way that she broke away. But how so many didn't get the opportunity. A lot of people were put out of the church. A lot of people still had their allegiances to Mary and Robert, even after the allegations of abuse, even after him, harassing the women in the church, saying, "You're in love with me." And they're like, "No, I'm not. I just love you." "No, you're in love with me. You don't just love me. You've got the lines drawn." Like, and I'm wondering, if these abuses have gone on and if there's more to talk about. I do think that there's more, much more under the surface that they didn't get into. And maybe a lot that we'll never know, but this was very interesting. Again, I think it makes you look at what a cult really is and how influence can lead to this type of thing, this exalted view of oneself, this ego, this pride. And then when you have people supporting it, right, you're getting a payoff when you behave this way. It further perpetrates it. Again, redemption over there at Soul Restoration, I guess, if you were a Faith Temple member, if you're a part of any abusive, manipulative ministry, I hope that it would make you stop and take note and it really examine what's happening, because it's easy to get caught up, y'all. But listen, that was the cult of the Real Housewife, Mary Cosby and them. There's a lot to unpack, but drop it in the comments. Let me know if you watched. Let me know what your thoughts are. Um, Yeah. Did you want to hear from Mary on this? Do we want to hear from? And that was the other thing. That was the other thing. Her last season being on Housewives, the most recent one that she was on, had that whole thing with Robert Jr., with her son and his addiction, and all of those things. And people lauded her, right, for being there and understanding and all of these things. And it's like, can this be the same person? I don't know. The question is left to us, I guess, the audience, to make up our own mind about it. But drop it in the comments. Like I said, let me know your thoughts. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, do all of the things. Please make sure you're having a happy, happy new year. And yeah, I'll see y'all in the next video. Thanks for watching.